Greetings and welcome back to 303. Let's continue now in our review of Dante's Paradise, Paradiso. And now we're going to review in a little bit more detail Canto 1 through 33. We'll begin in Canto 1, and the ascent to the first heaven. Dante, flying towards heaven with Beatrice, will fly through the air to get there. But then immediately, as we read just a few seconds ago, this is the translinguistic project. He will admit, I can't describe so much of what I've seen. He will invoke the muse, ironically, of Apollo, and then right away we'll begin to see the symbolism. The importance of light, the importance of music. Dante's going to begin then to talk a little bit from his medieval assumption, how the earth is the center of the universe, right? And that whole notion that each planet or sphere or is going to have a different musical note that will be a part of it. This will take us back to our study of Plato's Republic, and you'll remember borrowing from that ancient Pythagorean notion that if you look up and you see the harmony of the stars and everything, it explains all the harmony of the world, including musical harmony. Dante and Beatrice then will discuss this amazing harmony of God's world. All things desire to be close to God. Beatrice will argue, however, humans can be distracted. We'll remember the line from T.S. Eliot's Four Quartets, Bert Norton, distracted from distraction by distraction, filled with fancy and all of that. Canto 2. We are still in the first heaven, the sphere of the moon. We come to the first heaven, the sphere of the moon, and Dante's warning, the need to understand, he says, Canticles 1 and 2, to begin to survive, if you will, number 3. They will reach the first star, the moon. It's very beautiful. Beatrice will point out that God and human nature were made or created as one, and then they will discuss the spots on the moon. I'll let you do your own reading of that. It's kind of fascinating. Canto 3, first heaven continued. Dante will see those who broke their vows of chastity, sometimes because they were made to. Picardia is the sister of Dante from Purgatory, and she was forced to marry because her brother Caroso told her, made her. By the way, Caroso we saw in Inferno. She's happy, as all are, in her proper place in paradise, and Dante realizes that every sphere in heaven is a paradise. Dante will meet the Empress Constance of Sicily. She also was forced to marry. It's interesting because Picardia is one of the characters to whom Dante is related, and so we'll have family already being referenced at the very beginning of the paradise. Canto 4, we're in the same first heaven, the sphere of the moon. Beatrice is going to explain all souls are in the Imperium with God. And they are allowed to appear here to teach Dante. Because, I mean, if all you do as a soul in heaven is contemplate the divinity, then why are they spending any time talking to Dante and they're kind of being allowed to do this? The difference between absolute will and contingent will is also something that Beatrice will try to explain as well. This will take us back to our study of St. Augustine. Canto 5, still in the first heaven, the sphere of the moon, but then we will move to the second heaven, the sphere of Mercury. Dante will ask, can people make up their broken vows? And Beatrice will say, here's the thing, don't make or take vows lightly. She talks about Jephthah, of course, the Judges 11th story, and Agamemnon as well as mentioned, and Iphigenia's sacrifice. She warns Beatrice against hypocrisy and leaving the church. They are flying towards the second heaven. Dante sees all the lights of souls, and he wants to start a conversation leading us to Canto 6. Now we are in heaven, second heaven, the sphere of Mercury. Here we'll have Justinian, who will lecture Dante about the history of Rome, and this is really an amazing history lesson. I wish I had time, I would read the whole thing. His discussion of politics. You'll remember that in Canto 6 of Inferno, as well as in Canto 6 of Purgatory, we had also political kinds of discussions. Justinian will talk about the fear of fame and the longing for fame. Notice, this will be one of the central teachings of the Divine Comedy at the end. Dante, almost as poet, reminding himself as pilgrim, you can't love fame too much. You can't desire fame too much. We'll obviously later when we study our John Keats, we'll pay attention to the way Keats plays with this same idea. Justin will speak of Rome, and he'll talk about he'll speak with Romeo of Villanueva and Romeo's true heart, as he calls it. Canto 7, we're in the second heaven still, Spear of Mercury. Dante will ask Beatrice the theodicy question: is it fair to punish the Jews? Beatrice will respond, Adam's sin in Eden required God's Son Christ as crucifixion offering, well, Christian theology. Dante will ask, why did Christ have to die? And Beatrice will say that humans can't fully understand God's plans. This will be the way that Canto 7 will end, and it's going to be one of the central teachings of Dante in the Divine Comedy. There's things that you cannot understand. And right about the moment you think you've got it all figured out in terms of how Dante, for example, is constructing his poem or how God has constructed the universe, something's going to fly right in the face of that explanation. Canto 8, we're in the third heaven now, the sphere of Venus. Venus obviously representative of love. The explanation of why Venus got named and that whole issue of love is provided. And here they are, and they arrive. Dante will visit Charles Martel, one-time king of France. Dante will ask, why do bad sons come from good fathers? And obviously in Purgatory we played the reverse of that question as well. Martel will say that God acts through providence to keep the universe from chaos. And he says the earth needs diversity, which is kind of an interesting answer to the theodicy question as well, to thicken the plot, as one once said. That's why we have to have pain and suffering in the world. Canto 9, we are in the third heaven continued. Dante will speak with Canosa. She makes political prophecies. Dante will speak with Floco, as well as Rahab, the famous harlot during Joshua's time. And these have some of the highest rank in Venus, which is quite remarkable. Floco will slam Florence and the church. We're going to hear this a number of times. This attack on church hypocrisy is the term we used when we were studying our Chaucer, and we'll hear the same thing happening here. Canto 10, we're in the fourth heaven, the sphere of the sun. Dante will praise the harmony of the universe. Bright souls are going to dance around, both Beatrice and Dante. And here we're going to meet the great Thomas Aquinas. Of course, Aquinas of the Dominican order, founder, an amazing group of dancers here, religious, spiritual superstars, we might say. There's a ring of 12, and King Solomon, from King Solomon to Boethius and Bede and others as well. Canto 11, the fourth heaven continued. Aquinas will now speak, and he will talk about St. Francis of Assisi. Now this is important, put it in your notes. Thomas is going to represent the Dominicans. St. Francis, of course, as the founder of the Franciscans. By Dante's day, these two religious orders are kind of very much in conflict. But here we're going to see this incredible unity and harmony. Thomas will comment on St. Francis, and then later we're going to get the great Franciscan Bonaventure commenting on Thomas. So it's going to be this. St. Bonaventure is going to celebrate St. Dominic, the other founder of the Dominicans. So we're going to get this incredible harmony thing going on here, okay? St. Francis, of course, so important, let's put it in our notes, for at least three things. One, he renounced his wealth in the wealthy life and lived in poverty. See, it's one thing to be forced to live in poverty. It's another thing to choose poverty, and that's what St. Francis does. Number two, he very much called the church back to reform, and that's significant. And then finally, as is mentioned, St. Francis received the stigmata, the wounds of Christ, as evidence of his fine work and acts of humility. And then finally, Aquinas will speak about his own Dominican order. They have grown greedy, they have grown fat, and he's worried about them, actually. Canto 12, we're still here. St. Bonaventure will celebrate St. Dominic, the great preacher. St. Bonaventure, again, a very important Franciscan. Both Bonaventure as well as Aquinas will have died in the same year. So this, for Dante, will be representative of two great voices. Francis and Dominic both were like, according to St. Bonaventure, wheels on a chariot. Now, we've seen this already in Purgatory, that a great symbol of the church is often a chariot. It takes us all the way back, you'll remember, to the Republic. And when Plato talks about the tripartite view of the soul and the importance of having the two wheels, and then of course the driver of the chariot. So here we are at the symbolism of the chariot one more time. St. Bonaventure will criticize the Franciscans, the moldy wheel as he will call them, and he celebrates the other important theologians, namely St. Augustine. So we'll have a nod and a thanks to St. Augustine for speaking so well of St. Francis. All right. So Canto now 13. We're still in the fourth heaven. The starry souls sing praises to the Trinity. St. Thomas speaks of King Solomon's wisdom, and he also will make a cautionary comment, quote, "Don't judge too quickly. Things that appear bad can turn out good." This will be one of the central teachings of the theodictic enterprise of Dante. That we will say later is that understanding, stop asking, why is this happening to me when bad things happen, and learn to ask, why is this happening for me? We'll have more to say about that one later. Canto 14, we're in the fourth heaven, moving on to the fifth heaven, the sphere of Mars. If we go from the sphere of the sun, and obviously the sun representing wisdom in both pagan as well as Christian renderings. Now we're to the sphere of Mars. Mars, of course, violence, the war god and all of that. Beatrice will speak and will soon ask about souls and their light, and will they stay forever? Solomon will say, at Judgment Day we are reunited with our bodies. Beatrice and Dante will travel to the fifth heaven, Mars, and Dante will see a sign from God, two bright rays of light. They form a cross, and we will end with perfect vocal harmony. In Canto 15, we continue in the sphere of Mars. God's will brings all singing to a halt, we're told. We have a copy of the Aeneid of Anchises with Aeneas in Book 6. Why? Because Dante's great-great-grandfather, Cacciaguida, now is going to speak. He says, "I am your Ruth." This is, of course, going to be a fascinating moment later when we study our T.S. Eliot and the Hollow Man. One of the things that T.S. Eliot will suggest is, you know, some of us might be a little worried about the conversation we get to have on the other side, those who cross with direct eyes to death's other kingdom. Remember us, if at all, not as lost violent souls, but only as the hollow men, the stuffed men. The idea that we'll have to sit down and talk with our great-great-grandpa. For Dante, he gets to have this conversation. And it is, of course, an amazing conversation for Dante. And at the end of it, Dante's going to be pretty proud that, you know, of where he comes from in Cacciaguida. Cacciaguida, first of all, is going to give us a critique of Florence. The older days were far better than, you know, the way things are now. Cacciaguida fought in the Crusades and died in the Crusades. Quote, from martyrdom I came unto this place, he says, and to this peace. Canto 16, we got the continuation of the conversation. Dante's going to learn a lot about family here, and this will, of course, legitimate that notion of the importance of family. Cacciaguida is going to talk about how Florence has grown too large, and one of the problems with that is fathers don't get to have the amount of time with their children that they would wish, and ultimately, he says, time has ruined Florence. One more chance for Dante to stick it into Florence, who obviously exiled him. Canto 17, we are still in the fifth sphere of the sphere of Mars. Dante will ask Cacciaguida, will my future, what about me? Will my future be a rough one, bad? And we immediately think of Aeneas and Anchises in Aeneas 6, and the idea that you get to now hear something about your future. Cacciaguida doesn't pull any punches with his grandson. He tells him, no, you're about to get jacked. You're going to have serious exile problems. But he challenges him. He says, you know, when you first get out from Florence, you're gonna hang out with the wrong people. There are going to be some bad people. You're going to hope that you can get back, but ultimately you're going to learn from this entire experience. And he gives him the Great Commission, as is sometimes referred to. That is to say, you're going to write about the experiences, and you're going to use this whole thing of exile. But he does give him a promise that his reputation will be great. Dante will make a promise. He's going to tell his story, and there will be a reason for him telling his story. This is what we will later call a propedeutic, instructional, right? And he says, I'm not going to be a timid friend of truth. I'm going to tell, and if it itches someone, the language goes, let them scratch. In other words, I'm going to be harsh, and we know this, for example, with Boniface VIII, as we've said a number of times in our lectures, right? Cacciaguida will as well remind us that it's a good thing to have pain if you can use it. Truth sometimes does hurt. And of course, this Cachiquita will say, this thing you're going to write, it's going to cause a lot of pain, but it'll cause a lot of pain to the right people who need to have the experience of that pain. We think, obviously, of the Reformation of the Church. Canto 18, we're in the fifth heaven. We're going to finish there. We're going to move on to the sixth heaven, the sphere of Jupiter. Beatrice will suggest that God is on Dante's side and will support his efforts. Cachiquita will introduce Dante to important souls, from Joshua to Maccabees to Charlemagne to Roland, a whole host of them. Beatrice and Dante then are moving on to the sixth heaven, which is Jupiter. The souls will form letters, and therefore words. And some of those words are love, justice, you who judge the earth, one soul, and then they all kind of turn into an eagle's head, and the eagle's head then begins to speak and will immediately condemn greedy popes and a corrupt church. We want to point this out for your notes. Think of it. The Inferno was set in 1300, right? Think about what happened just 200 years later, right? The 31st of October, 1517, we have 200 years later, Luther, his 95 Theses, and he is playing the exact same issue. Dante will have problems as well, just like Luther, with this selling of indulgences and the way that money corrupted the church, basically. Canto 19, here we are in the sixth heaven again, the sphere of Jupiter still, and the eagle will comment on a number of other things and then finally finish. And he finishes with this notion that you can't fully understand God's wisdom. This will be that direction towards humility that we're going to hear again and again. Dante will ask, what about those who never hear of Christ? Are they lost? And the answer is, they are. The eagle will then attack evil Christian rulers, and he will provide a list of some bad rulers. This will, of course, be Dante's ability to still kind of start to stick the knife in. Canto 20, still in the sixth heaven, the eagle will tell Dante to look at his eye, and there 6 souls are seen. One of those, David, the great singer, the poet of the Holy Spirit. We're going to see Trajan there, Hezekiah there, Constantine, a whole group of them. We're going to hear, in fact, interestingly, that Ripheus is there. Now, you'll maybe remember Ripheus briefly mentioned in Book 2 of the Aeneid as one of the great Trojan fighters. So wait a minute, I thought that anybody who died before Christ's death, burial, and resurrection always ended up, if they were a good pagan, in limbo. See, this is Dante's, again, one more observation that you can't always assume everything. And of course, to us as readers, we can't assume everything either. This is one of the reasons why I said to you guys when we were messing around in Inferno, you got to read the entire poem to get a better picture of the project that is Dante's project, his mission, if you will. Now, the question for us, again, is why not Virgil then? Why is Virgil in limbo, and then this Ripheus, who's virtually unknown, is here? Can't understand God's logic. Again, humility. Faith, hope, and love baptized Ripheus, we're told, and Dante, again, is admonished, don't try to predict or understand entirely God's plan. You get kind of the sense then that Dante understands, okay, I got to do this thing, this project, but I'm not going to completely appreciate or understand everything that's involved in that project. All right, we are now into Canto 21, the seventh heaven, the sphere of Saturn. And here, Beatrice will tell Dante they're in the seventh heaven of Saturn. Dante will see the golden ladder, Jacob's ladder as we referenced it, can't see the top of it, right? And this will take us again back to Canto 24 of Inferno. Up on your feet, there is a longer ladder, higher ladder yet to climb, and Dante has more work to do. Dante will ask his soul, why is it so quiet here in the sphere of Saturn? And the answer is, you can't handle the sound. You know this line, you can't handle the truth, from an old movie? Same gig getting played here. And then the spinning soul is St. Peter Damine, and he will start out, he says in his story, as Peter the Sinner, and ultimately he became a cardinal. This is that whole notion of the ability, the reason to hope in the possibility of redemption. St. Peter Damine will then blast corrupt popes, fat popes as he will call them, and then Canto 22 begins because Dante will need to be awakened by Beatrice. She will in fact say that bad popes as well are going to get jacked. So you can see this all the way through this text. St. Benedict will then talk with Dante. He says we're all contemplatives here in Saturn, which will explain as well the possibility of the silence. Dante then will ask, can I see your human face? And he's answered no, but he does say that the Imperium, where the ladder ends, Jacob's ladder will provide him with the opportunity of seeing some faces. St. Benedict then will talk as well about how sad he is about the religious clerics and the church. So you can get the picture here. In almost, it's hard to argue this, but almost you seem like there's more of this propedeutic, this correctional stuff happening in the treatment in paradise than in any other place in the Divine Comedy. St. Benedict's, after he says that he's sad about the corrupt religious class, Dante and Beatrice will fly up the ladder towards the eighth heaven. Dante will then one more time have the opportunity of looking down, and he's amazed at where he has been. I think there's a good reason for this. Put it in your notes. I think one of the things that we're trying to say here is that when you're at the end of the journey, it's not a bad thing to begin to ask about where you've been so that you can get a sense of where you want to go. Canto 23. We are in the eighth heaven, the sphere of the fixed stars, as it's called, the bright lights. Beatrice will call them the troops of the triumphant Christ. Dante sees Christ in the sun in the sphere and, of course, is blinded. Dante will feel his mind opening up, he says. And Beatrice now will smile at Dante. We get one or two moments when she smiles at Dante. Beatrice sees then the rose, the multifoliate rose, the rose that represents the Word of God made flesh. Dante sees Mary surrounded by spirits and angelic love. We're going to begin to hear a lot about love through paradise at the end of this thing. Mary and Christ will ascend into the ninth heaven, and Dante will end this canto with a beautiful song hymn of St. Peter, or to St. Peter, the keeper of the keys of the kingdom of heaven. Canto 24, still in the eighth heaven, Dante will meet St. Peter, and now we will begin the test part. It's almost like, okay, you come to the end, and now you got to have your test, right? And so here we go, Dante's conversation with St. Peter. Beatrice will invite Peter to test Dante so that Dante deserves the right to move on. Peter will ask, what is faith? Dante will quote Paul.